Today's lesson is lesson 3.4, and it is using inverse functions. The first thing we need to look at is a couple of vocabulary terms that you're going to see. The first is the inverse relation. The inverse relation is a relation that interchanges the input and output values of the original relation. Now, what that means is when you see an equation like I have right here, that y equals 3x plus 4, when it says to interchange the input and output, what that means is you are going to move the x to where the y is and put the y where the x was, because the x is the input and the y is the output. Now, the second vocabulary term is the inverse function. What that means is it's an original relation and its inverse relation whenever both relations are functions. Alright, they both have to equal a function in order for it to be inverse functions. Now, what that means is that you're going to have to be able to graph them or be able to solve them like we're going to do right here to find the inverse. And then once you know the inverse, you can plug in the inverse into the original like we did in the last lesson, the g of f of x, and to see if it'll end up coming up being just x. And again, we're going to have an example of that in just a moment. But the first thing we want to do is find the inverse relation. So this y equals 3x plus 4, what we're going to do is do the inverse relation. So again, it says to interchange the input and output. So that means I'm going to go ahead and switch x for y and y for x. X equals 3y plus 4. All I did was interchange the x and y. From here, you want to solve for y. So the first thing I want to do is subtract 4 from both sides. So now I have x minus 4 equals 3y. But y is not by itself, and so I have to divide both sides by 3, which will end up getting me 1/3 x minus 4/3 equals y. And this is your inverse relation to y equals 3x plus 4. Now, you'll notice that I did 1/3 x. You can also write it as just x over 3. It's the same exact answer. It'll get you the same exact answer every time. And whether or not you do 1/3 times x or you just put x over 3, it's basically the same term. Now what we're going to look at is the inverse function. Now, if you remember when I was talking about our vocabulary, this f of g of x brings back our lesson from yesterday, and then our g of f of x. So, in inverse functions, what you do is you switch the order of what your beginning function is and what you're adding into it to see if when you switch them and do them twice, if they end up being the same answer. Now, one thing to keep in mind is when it's wanting you to use the inverse, inverse is denoted by f of a -1, which is called f inverse. So anytime you see f and then a -1, you're going to automatically just know that means you're looking for the inverse, or that is the inverse. So what I want to do now is verify that the functions are inverses. So again, we have f of x equals 4x plus 3, and f inverse of x equals 1/4 x minus 3/4. So I need to do f of g of x, or f of f inverse of x. Now, what I want to do is f of x, so 4x plus 3. Now, once I put that in, remember I need to now put my f inverse in place of my x. So I'm going to say 4 times 1/4 x minus 3/4. Again, I'm going to go ahead and put my equal signs. 4 has to be distributed to everything in the parentheses. So 4 times 1/4 gives me 4 over 4 x. And 4 times a negative 3 over 4 gives me a negative 12 fourths equals 4 divided by 4 gives us 1. So 1x. And then the 12 divided by 4 gives us a negative 3. Oh, I forgot my plus 3 here. Plus 3. And my plus 3. Now, again, 12 over 4 gives us 3. So I have minus 3 plus 3. Well, this minus 3 plus 3 cancel out. So my answer equals x equals just plain x, I guess. Or you could say x equals 1. We don't have an equal over here. So what you can ultimately do is just leave it as just x, or 1x. Now, we're going to try it again. This time I want f inverse of f of x. So my f inverse is 1/4 x minus 3/4. Well, now that I've gotten that written, I have to remember that I need to put my f of x in the place of this x. So I'm going to say 1/4 times 4x plus 3 minus 3/4. Again, I need to distribute this 1/4 to everything in the parentheses. So 1/4 times 4 gives us 4 over 4x. And 1/4 times 3 gives me plus 3 over 4. And I just bring down my minus 3 over 4. 4 over 4 gives us 1, so 1x. And again, I have a positive 3/4 minus 3/4, so I can go ahead and say, well, those cancel out. So my only answer gives us 1x, or just x. So as you can see, they both come up to being x or just 1x, and so they are inverses of each other. The last concept we want to look at today involves using a horizontal line test. Now, we have used a vertical line test before, which means we are going to go through the x-axis going straight down to see if something is a function. But when we are looking for the inverse function, and if it's looking to see if the inverse will be a function, we're going to use a horizontal line test, which means we are going to be looking straight across the, we're going to find a line at y and just go straight across all the way down if we need to. But the horizontal line test says that this line can only cross the graph line one time. And what I mean by this line, I'm talking about the horizontal line test. Wherever I put the line, it can only cross the function that is graphed one time. If it crosses it only one time, then it lets us know that the inverse of that function is also a function. And so what we want to do now is we want to go ahead and look. It says find the inverse of a power function. And they gave us f of x equals a negative x cubed minus 2. And then it says determine whether the inverse of f is a function and then find the inverse. And so the first thing I want to do is I want to look and see on my graph right here of a negative x cubed minus 2. If I want to draw lines straight across, so I'm going to go ahead and draw some dotted lines. If I'm going to draw dotted lines straight across, that one only crosses once. If I want to try again, I can go down here. Well, that only crossed once. I can keep going down right here. Well, that crossed once. Even right here where it curves a little bit, it crosses once. and go on down. So therefore, based on my horizontal line test, straight across, it only crosses the function once. And so therefore, we can say that the inverse will be a function. So I'm going to go ahead and put inverse will be a function. Now, that's the first thing they asked us. So now what we want to do is find the inverse. The way to find the inverse, again, we have to go ahead and switch our x and y's around. So f of x equals a negative x cubed minus 2. Now, one thing that a lot of people might get confused on is f of x, it stands for the function of x. When you're graphing it, you can go ahead and replace this function of x with y. Because in your calculator, when you're using your calculator, even if you're graphing using a table, you're going to have a y. Because when we look at our graphs, we have an x-axis and we have a y-axis. And so I can replace this by saying y equals a negative x cubed minus 2. Now remember that when we're trying to do an inverse, we have to interchange my x and y's. So I have x equals a negative y cubed minus 2. All I did was move my x and my y around. Now I want to start solving for y. The first thing I want to do is I want to add 2 to both sides. So I have x plus 2 equals a negative y cubed. And again, I add because it's right now it says a minus. I have to make that equal 0. And that's why I add 2. And then I added 2 to this side. Now, the next thing I want to do, I want to get rid of this negative sign. So what I can do is go ahead and multiply all this side by a negative 1. Or you can say divide by a negative 1. It's going to give you the same answer. So I'm going to go a negative x minus 2 equals y cubed. Now, the last thing you have to look at is getting rid of your cubed. The way to do that is cube root. So, your answer would be cube root of a negative x minus 2 equals y. But we started with f of x. And so what we can do is say that f inverse of x equals the cube root of a negative x minus 2. And there is the inverse of f of x equals a negative x cubed minus 2. And keep in mind, we found that the inverse will be a function.